So today we will start with the different types of sensors in remote sensing. We last class we saw many references to the sun as a source of energy or radiation, right? So this sun, it provides a very convenient source of energy for remote sensing, and it is that energy that is provided by the sun, it is either reflected uh, like for the visible wavelengths, or it is absorbed and then re-emitted when it is in the case of thermal infrared, right? We saw the case of thermal infrared, etc., in the last class, right? So the sun's energy can either be reflected like what we see in the visible wavelength, because all these colors that we see, there's some reflected energy that reaches our eye, isn't it? So some of the sun's energy, it is reflected, and some of it is absorbed and it is later re-emitted, which we saw in the case of thermal infrared, right? So remote sensing systems which measure energy that is naturally available are called passive sensors, and they can be used to detect energy when the naturally occurring energy is available, like sun, right? When the naturally available energy is available, this passive sensors can sense the energy, and it can be used only when that external source of energy is available, right? Like in the daytime. In the night time, you cannot use passive sensors unless your sensor is in the thermal IR range, and the thermal IR range have enough energy being emitted from the surface features, right? So some of the earth's features, they absorb the sun's energy during the daytime when this energy is available, and at night they will emit this stored energy, right? So they will have some surface temperature and they will be emitting some radiation. So that radiant excitance can be observed using this thermal IR systems, right? But in the other case, they can obtain the data about a particular feature only when it is reflecting the sun's energy, and for which you can use these passive sensors, right? And for active sensors, they provide their own energy source for illumination, right? Can you give a general or common example for an active sensor? Mobile phone with flash, right? It's a general basic simple example for an active sensor, right? So remote sensing satellites or radars that are used for measuring signals transmitted by the sensor that are reflected, refracted, or scattered by the Earth's surface or its atmosphere. They are called active sensors. So this sensor emits radiation which is directed towards the target to be investigated, and the radiation reflected from that target is detected and measured by the sensor. Active sensors, it can be used to obtain measurements anytime, regardless of the time or day or season, right? And they can be used for examining wavelengths that are not sufficiently provided by the sun, for example, like microwaves, or to better control the way a target is illuminated, right? So, but the problem is that for active sensors, the source should be able to generate a fairly large amount of energy to adequately illuminate the targets, right? So the major advantages of active remote sensing is that it has a capability to collect imagery night and day, and another thing is that it is unfazed by clouds and poor weather conditions, right? So the second point, we will come to that in detail today itself. All right. All right. So coming to the energy interactions in the atmosphere is a very important topic. So before I start with these new terms, path length, scattering, absorption, etc. So we saw in the last class how remote sensing is possible, right? You have a source, then that energy from the source travels to the earth feature, then that energy is reflected and travels through the atmosphere, that travels back through the atmosphere to the sensor in the satellite, right? And then it is processed, and then it is made available to the user, right? So we saw that this energy is actually, it is traveling through the atmosphere to the feature, earth feature, and then it is reflected, and then it travels back through the same atmosphere to the satellite where it is sensed, right? So there is a chance of lot of interactions with the atmosphere. For that energy, there is a lot of chance of interactions in the atmosphere, right? So this energy, it can be scattered or absorbed in the atmosphere during its traveling phase, right? From the source to the earth feature, and from the earth feature when it is reflected back to the sensor, right? Travels from the sun, the light travels from the sun, it falls on the earth feature, it travels through the atmosphere and falls on the earth feature, then it is reflected back and it is sensed by the satellite, right? So before the radiation used for remote sensing reaches the earth's surface, it has to travel through some distance of the earth's atmosphere, and in that atmosphere there are particles and gases that can affect the incoming light and radiation. So these effects are caused by two mechanisms mainly called scattering and absorption, right? So the path, the distance, the radiation detected by remote sensors, it passed through a distance in the atmosphere. That distance is called the path length, right? The radiation detected by the remote sensors, it passed through a distance in the atmosphere. That distance, how much distance radiation or energy has to travel through the atmosphere, is called path length, and that varies with respect to the spaceborne and airborne sensors. Yeah, so net effect of this atmosphere, one major parameter that affects the atmosphere's effect in energy interactions is, one is the difference in the path length, then the magnitude of energy signal sensed, then the atmospheric conditions present. How can the atmospheric conditions affect it? Very humid condition or very smoky condition, etc., they can affect the remote sensing quality, isn't it? Do you think so? Do you agree? A highly foggy area versus a bright sunny day, which one will give you a better data about an earth feature? Of course, a bright sunny day, isn't it? So the atmospheric conditions present also affect our remote sensing quality. Then the last one is the wavelengths involved. So the atmosphere affects the intensity and spectral composition of the radiations, as I mentioned earlier, due to two major mechanisms called the scattering and absorption. So here in this figure you can see during the sunrise and sunset and during the noon how the path length varies, right? You can see here, right? During the sunrise the path length is high, during the sunset the path length is high, and during the noon the path length is less, right? Can you see this? So how this affects, let us see. So atmospheric scattering. So what is scattering? It's an unpredictable diffusion of radiation by particles in the atmosphere. So this occurs when the particles or large gas molecules present in the atmosphere interact with and cause the electromagnetic radiation to be redirected from its original path. It is traveling from the sun to the earth feature, and it is traveling from the reflected energy is traveling from the reflected feature to the satellite. So in between this, it can be redirected from its original path. That process or unpredictable diffusion is called scattering. So how much scattering takes place, it depends upon several factors, including the wavelength of the radiation, abundance of the particles or gases, distance the radiation travels through the atmosphere, etc., the influencing factors that we saw just before, right? So there are basically three different types of scattering that takes place. So one is Rayleigh scattering, another one is Mie scattering, and the last one is non-selective scattering. So you might have experienced all these different types of scattering. Do you know why the sky looks reddish or orangish during the early sunrise and during the sunset times? You have observed that, right? During the daytime the sky appears kind of blue, and during the morning and during the sunset it appears reddish. Do you know why? Have you observed it? Yes or no? So why does that happen? The radiation interacts with atmospheric molecules that are smaller in diameter than the wavelength of interacting radiation. All right. When the particles are smaller compared to the wavelength of the radiation, Rayleigh scattering occurs. So it is a phenomena that occurs. It's a type of scattering, that is unpredictable diffusion of radiation that occurs when the particles are smaller compared to the wavelength of the radiation. So these could be particles such as small specks of dust or nitrogen and oxygen molecules, etc., in the atmosphere. And this scattering, Rayleigh scattering, it causes short wavelengths of energy to be scattered much more than the longer wavelengths, right? It scatters short wavelengths than the long wavelengths because it happens due to scattering due to small sized particles like specks of dust or nitrogen and oxygen molecules, right? So this scattering is the dominant scattering mechanism in the upper atmosphere, right? So this is the reason why the sky appears blue during the day, and as sunlight passes through the atmosphere, the shorter wavelengths, which is the shortest wavelength, blue, green, red, which is the shortest wavelength? Blue, right? So the shorter wavelength of the visible spectrum, it is scattered, it is getting scattered more than the other longer visible wavelengths. Which are the longer wavelengths? Out of the visible spectrum, red is having a longer wavelength, right? So Rayleigh scattering happens when the atmospheric molecules that are smaller in diameter than the wavelength of interacting radiation scatters that energy, right? So the shorter wavelength in the visible spectrum, like blue, it is scattered more than the other longer visible wavelengths. So the shorter wavelengths that we observe, that is blue, green and all, they are scattered very well, and what we observe are the unscattered energy which is in the longer or larger wavelengths, that is red. That is why during sunrise and sunset, during sunrise and sunset the path length is also more, right? As the path length is more, there is a possibility for more interactions in the atmosphere as well, and more of this shorter wavelength energy is diffused during sunrise and sunset. So at sunrise and sunset, that light has to travel farther through the atmosphere than at midday, and the scattering of the shorter wavelengths is more complete, right? So this leaves a greater proportion of the longer wavelengths to penetrate the atmosphere. That is why during sunrise and sunset we observe the longer wavelengths, and during the noon time we observe a bluish sky. All right. So next type of scattering is called Mie scattering. So Mie scattering is another type of scattering or diffusion of energy which happens when the particle diameter is almost equal to the wavelength of energy. All right. So here the particles under consideration are like dust, pollen, smoke, water vapor, etc. So these generally cause Mie scattering. So this tends to affect longer wavelengths than those affected by that of the Rayleigh scattering. Right? So Rayleigh scattering, it affected the shorter wavelengths, but Mie scattering affects the longer wavelengths of the energy spectra. And this occurs mainly in the lower parts of the atmosphere where larger particles are more abundant, and it further dominates when the cloud conditions are overcast. All right. So this is the reason, the Mie scattering is the reason why, I told you that the particle diameter is equal to the wavelength of energy. So mainly, it is mainly the particles that affect it is dust, smoke, pollen and water vapor, right? So you see water vapor there. Clouds appear white, right? Do you know why clouds appear white? Why do clouds appear white? So when light is scattered in a cloud, when the incident energy falls on the cloud, it is sent back upwards. It is reflected back upwards or out to the sides of the cloud, right? Making the top and the sides of the cloud whiter than the base, which receives less light. The base of the cloud, the base of the cloud receives lesser light than on the top, because on the top of the clouds, when you observe from the plane or something, you see that the clouds are very white, isn't it? You might have seen images from the airplane, or you might have observed when you have traveled on an airplane. You can see that the clouds appear very white, pure white. It looks like pure snow from up above. But when you look from the earth, you can see that the clouds are not purely white most of the time, but they appear grayish towards the edges or grayish towards the base, right? Yes or no? You have observed that? Have you observed that? Gray or white color of the clouds, when you observe from the earth, you can see that the clouds, maybe it will look a bit more grayish, and if they are rain clouds, they appear very dark, isn't it? Have you observed that difference? Yeah, so that happens because on the top of the clouds, this Mie scattering occurs. And during the Mie scattering, what happens is that when the light falls on the top of the clouds, there are a lot of water vapor or water particles in that clouds. So Mie scattering, which is the particle diameter is almost equal to the wavelength of the incident energy, and that energy is diffused. So whatever energy falls on the top of the cloud, it is reflected, and the top of the cloud appears very white, but most of the energy that is falling on the cloud, it is reflected from the top surface itself, so that most of the energy doesn't reach the base of the cloud. So what happens is the base of the clouds appear darker or grayish, and this is intensified in the case of a rain cloud. Why? Because in the case of rain clouds, the concentration of water vapor or water molecules or water particles in that cloud is very high, isn't it? So due to that, much more intensive scattering occurs, so that when you look at the clouds from the top, you can see that the waves are, the energy is reflected very well, and that from the top it might appear white itself, but that energy doesn't reach the base of the cloud, so it appears darker or grayish at the bottom. Is that clear? So this mist scattering, it is more prominent in rain clouds because the cloud droplets are bigger. The scattering more light, meaning even less light from the sun reaches the bottom of the cloud, giving that rain clouds their intimidating appearance, right? Okay, the third type of scattering is non-selective scatter. So non-selective scatter occurs when the particle diameter is much higher than the incident energy wavelengths. So this also, it occurs in the lower portion of the atmosphere when the particles are much larger than the incident radiation. All right. So that is called non-selective scattering. So this occurs when the particles are much larger than the wavelength of the incident radiation. So the major particles that cause this are larger water droplets and large dust particles. And this is what causes haze. As you can see in the background image, you can see a hazy image, isn't it? Can you see this image? You can see a hazy or foggy image. Why? Because there is a lot of humidity, or there are a lot of dust particles or smoky condition where the incident energy is non-selectively scattered. That is, the longer wavelengths, shorter wavelengths, medium wavelengths, everything is scattered equally in this condition. Non-selectively it is scattered, so that the whole energy that is sensed by the sensor is dropped. That is why you get a hazy appearance like this. So this type of scatter is called non-selective scatter, and it happens when the particle diameter is higher than the incident wavelength. All right, so the next topic. So the major two types of energy interaction that happens in the atmosphere, one is scattering and the another one is absorption, as I mentioned earlier, right? So absorption, so it is a another mechanism when electromagnetic radiation interacts with the atmosphere. So instead of you know in contrast to scattering, this phenomenon causes molecules in the atmosphere to absorb energy at various wavelengths, right? In scattering, what happened was different wavelength energy was diffused, right, or scattered. But in the case of absorption, different wavelength energy are absorbed by various components in the atmosphere. So what are those components? Let us see. One is ozone, another one is carbon dioxide, and another one is water vapor. These three are the major atmospheric constituents which absorb radiation. Okay, have you heard of ozone absorption? Ozone in the atmosphere is very important. You might have heard that, right? Why is ozone very important? We have an ozone layer and all, and it saves us from what? Ozone saves us from
UV rays.
UV
UV
rays,
rays.
right? It saves us from UV radiation, right? So if you look at this graph, so how does it save us from UV radiation? Any idea? How does it save us from UV radiation? So the lower wavelength part in the electromagnetic spectra, UV is in the lower wavelength part, isn't it? Below the visible spectra, right? UV. So that part, that short wavelengths are absorbed by this ozone, as you can see in this graph. Can you see the leftmost side of the graph? The shortest wavelength are UV here, and they are completely absorbed by O3. You can see here. Can you see that? The UV wavelength, the absorption, the transmission rate only reaches 100% towards the longer wavelength in the visible spectra. Until then, your absorption is very high due to presence of ozone in the atmosphere. Can you see that? So ozone absorbs. So two major energy interaction processes that happen in the atmosphere. One is scattering and another one is absorption. So three major components in the atmosphere that absorbs this energy from the electromagnetic spectra are water vapor, carbon dioxide and ozone. Right. So as you can see here, the UV energy in the UV range or UV wavelengths in the UV range, it is absorbed by ozone. As you can see here, the transmission only happens towards the larger wavelength and below that absorption happens. So UV is absorbed completely by ozone, and after that the transmission rates are very high. As you can see in the graph, the transmission rates are very high. There is nothing to absorb the visible wavelength. Can you see that? Very less of the visible part is absorbed, rest everything is transmitted, right? 100% transmittance for visible spectra, and only very less part of the visible spectra is absorbed. So you might have heard that carbon dioxide is called a greenhouse gas, yes or no? So majority of that is carbon dioxide, and as the concentration of carbon dioxide increases in the atmosphere, more of this heat energy is absorbed, isn't it? So heat energy, it comes in which wavelengths? It comes in the majority of it comes in the thermal IR range, right? Isn't it? So you might have you have already heard that carbon dioxide is referred as a greenhouse gas. So the reason why it is called so is because it tends to absorb radiation strongly in the far infrared portion of the spectrum. You can see here the far infrared. Can you see that? In the far infrared, carbon dioxide acts as a major absorbent, and the transmission is, it drops to zero. You can see that. Can you see this? Transmission is very less. So when an incident energy of high wavelength, 15 to 30 microns, that is the far infrared wavelength, falls on the earth, what happens? Only about 10% of it is transmitted, and the rest everything is absorbed, right? So the carbon dioxide or the greenhouse gases, they tend to absorb radiation strongly in the far infrared portion of the spectrum, and that area is associated with thermal heating. So this thermal heat, it serves to trap this heat inside the atmosphere. It traps the heat inside the atmosphere. It absorbs and traps that heat in the atmosphere. Right? Is that clear? And water vapor also, water vapor in the atmosphere absorbs most of the incoming heat inside the most of the incoming long wave infrared and short wave microwave radiation. Can you see that? Short wave microwave, sorry, long wave infrared, longer infrared. You can see thermal infrared H2. Here you can see thermal IR, longer wavelength. So water vapor in the atmosphere, it absorbs much of the incoming long wavelength infrared and short wavelength microwave radiation. And the presence of water vapor in the lower atmosphere, it varies greatly from location to location and at different times of the year, right? For example, if you look at the air mass above a desert, it would have little water vapor to absorb the energy, right? You feel very hot there, right? Isn't it? So the absorption is very less in a desert because you have very less water vapor mass in a desert, right? So the absorption, heat absorption by the water particles will be very less. But when you compare it to the tropics, which have very high concentration of water vapor, that is high humidity, most of the heat energy is absorbed by that water particles. Most of the heat energy in the long wave infrared and short wave microwave radiation, it is absorbed by the water vapor, right? So the transmission is very less, so you feel cooler in the tropics, but as the water vapor concentration is very less in the case of similar to deserts, there the heat is more of the heat is transmitted, right? Because there is not much water vapor to absorb that heat energy, right? So you will feel hotter there, isn't it? So, because these gases absorb electromagnetic energy in very specific regions of the spectrum, as you can see here, I have shown you the different wavelengths of the spectrum, and you can see that these greenhouse gases, they absorb at specific wavelengths, right? You can see that here, right? They absorb at very specific regions in the spectrum. they influence where in the spectrum we can actually look for remote sensing purposes, right? So if you want to observe something, you can observe something in the thermal IR range here. Sorry, you can observe something in the, between the thermal IR and the far IR. You can see that there is a transmission window, right? So you can sense something in this range. Agree? You can sense something here because here the transmission is very high. You can sense something in the visible spectrum of the electromagnetic spectra, right? Can you see that? In the visible region, transmission is very high. In these wavelengths, the transmission is very high. Here, the transmission is very high. So you can see in the visible wavelength, something about 0.4 to about 1. You can see that the transmission is very high. Transmission is almost 100%, right? Right? Then you have some peaks in the reflected IR range. Can you see that? So it means that if you look at, or let us consider the case of UV. If we have a remote sensing sensor which senses something below 0.4 microns of wavelength, that is in the UV range, will you be able to sense it actually? You have a sensor in the UV range. Will that sensor be able to sense the earth features? No, right? Why? Because that energy will, most of that energy will be absorbed by ozone, isn't it? Right? Similarly, something between 4 to 8 micron wavelength, you have a sensor which operates in the 4 to 8 micron wavelength. So you should understand for what wavelengths these absorptions occur. Based on this, for specific purposes, for different conditions, you can choose what wavelength operating sensors should be chosen for a specific purpose. Is that clear? That is the relevance of this atmospheric absorption in remote sensing. Is that clear? So based on this absorption and transmission rates only, for specific purposes, for your purpose, you should be able to choose your remote sensing sensors sensing wavelength. Is that clear? Your eye is a remote sensing sensor, right? What is the wavelength in which your eye operates? The visible wavelength, isn't it? So you can see something about 0.4 to 0.7 is the visible range. That is the wavelength at which your phone camera also works, isn't it? Right? It captures in this wavelength. Yes or no? So suppose you have to capture something in the, you cannot see something in, you are looking for a particular feature which emits radiation in the 5 to 7 micron wavelength. All right. So you have to use such a sensor, right? Yes or no, for your specific application. Based on your specific application, you have to decide which wavelength your sensor should operate in. So these areas of the spectrum which are not severely influenced by atmospheric absorption and thus are useful to remote sensors, and they are called atmospheric windows. All right. So atmospheric windows, simple definition, are wavelength ranges in which atmosphere is particularly transmissive of energy. Is that clear? So they are called atmospheric windows. All right. So by comparing the characteristics of two most common energy or radiation sources, that is the sun and the earth, with the atmospheric windows available to us, we can define those wavelengths that we can use most effectively for remote sensing. Is that clear? So if you look at this graph, the bottom graph, the upper graph is what we saw in the previous slide, the transmission percentages for different wavelengths, and the bottom graph is the spectral radiance or spectral radiant excitance or energy excitance versus wavelength. Here you can see the green color here. This is the earth feature. The dominant wavelength for the earth features was something about 9.8 micrometer, isn't it? Do you remember? Right, and for the sun it was in the visible range. Yes, do you remember this graph? So For, you should be able to correlate these for maximum efficiency of a remote sensing sensor to identify what wavelengths we can use the remote sensors most effectively. So the visible portion of the spectrum to which our eyes are the most sensitive, that correspond to both an atmospheric window and the peak energy level of the sun, isn't it? You can see here, right? The yellow bands, right? The transmission is also very high. The energy level is also very high. So the energy available for transmission will be very high, and the transmission is also very high, right? Also, the heat energy emitted by the earth, that corresponds to a window of around 10 micrometer, that is in the thermal IR portion of the spectrum. Can you see here? Thermal IR. Can you see here? The thermal IR portion, the transmission is very high. For the dominant wavelength of the earth
Yes, sir.
features, it is something about around 10, right? So here also you can see the thermal IR region, the transmission is very high. So if you have thermal infrared sensors, right, you can observe the earth features without an external source to illuminate it. So here also some energy is available from the earth's emittance of energy. During the morning the earth absorbs the energy from the sun and stores it, and during the night time also it continuously emits it, or even during the morning also it absorbs and emits some energy. That emission is in the range of 9 to 11 micrometer wavelength, right? Dominant wavelength was 9.8 micrometer. So in that range, you have some energy to radiate, and that there also in that window also you have some. In the top graph, if you see, there also you can see there is a transmission window. So if you have remote sensing sensors, you have a satellite having sensors that operate between the 9 to 11 micrometer wavelength range, it can sense this thermal images. Do you get this connection now? So based on these energy available and the transmission windows, you can wisely choose the range of wavelengths in which your sensors should work. But if you look at very large wavelengths, like the microwave wavelength, you can see at the end, towards the end of that graph, you can see that the transmission is going to almost 100 percentage, right? Do you see that? The transmission is very high in the microwave region. That means these greenhouse gases or these components in the atmosphere like ozone, carbon dioxide, water vapor, none of those affect or absorb or even scatter wavelengths in the very large or very long wavelength region like microwaves. This is where I mentioned earlier, you see, key advantages of active remote sensing. We had the second point, it is unfazed by clouds and poor weather conditions, right? Do you remember this? It is unfazed by clouds and poor weather conditions. So if you can use microwave remote sensing for conditions where there are lot of clouds or when there is a poor weather condition. Why? Because the clouds, water vapor in the atmosphere, or poor weather condition, that is a lot of dust or anything in the atmosphere, none of these is going to absorb any energy in this very long wavelength microwave region. So most of that energy interactions in the microwave region will be unaffected, and you can get very good data about the features using sensors which operate in this microwave region. That is the relevance of microwaves in remote sensing. So if it is a highly cloudy area and you want to observe the Earth features, you will deploy a remote sensing satellite which have sensors in which wavelength, operating in which wavelength. You will deploy sensors in the microwave wavelength, right? About more than 1 mm to 1 meter wavelength. So this is the relevance of microwaves in remote sensing. This is very important. All right. So finally, before deciding the remote sensing equipment, we should consider various parameters like the spectral sensitivity of the sensors, presence or absence of atmospheric windows in the required spectral range, the source, magnitude, and spectral composition of energy available in these regions, and the manner in which energy interacts with the features under investigation. So these 4 parameters you should consider before deciding a remote sensing equipment or deploying a remote sensing satellite or airborne remote sensing project. All right, clear? Now, moving on to energy interactions with the Earth's surface features. So the radiation that is not absorbed or scattered in the atmosphere, it can reach and interact with the Earth's surface, right? So there are three forms of interaction that can take place when the energy strikes a feature, or the incident energy strikes a feature. So one is reflection, another is absorption, and the third one is transmission. All right, reflection, absorption, and transmission. These three things can happen to a incident energy on the Earth feature. So the total incident energy, it will interact with the surface in one or more of these three ways. All right, and the proportion of each of these, reflection, absorption, and transmission, the proportions of each, it will depend on the wavelength of the energy and the material and condition of the feature. All right, the proportion of energy reflected, absorbed, or transmitted, it vary for different Earth features and also on the wavelength of the energy. So depending upon the material type and condition, this ratio, or how much reflectance happens, how much absorption happens, and how much transmission happens, so that varies, depends upon the material type and condition, and this can be used in distinguishing Earth features. All right, and even within a feature type, the reflected energy, absorbed energy, and transmitted energy can vary for different wavelengths. Suppose, imagine a leaf, a green leaf. Why does leaves appear green? Yeah, due to chlorophyll. What happens due to chlorophyll? So this chlorophyll, it is a chemical compound in the leaves, right? So that chemical compound in the leaves, its importance is that it strongly absorbs radiation in the red and blue wavelengths. All right, the short wavelengths and long wavelengths in the visible spectra is largely absorbed by this chlorophyll, right? So the incident energy, some of the energy is absorbed, some of the energy is transmitted, some of the energy is reflected. Okay, in the case of a leaf, the red and blue wavelengths are absorbed. So what is reflected in the visible spectra? Out of red, green, and blue in the visible spectrum, red and blue is absorbed by chlorophyll in the leaf. So what is reflected? Green is reflected, isn't it? So that is the reason why leaves appear green. All right. But in some seasons, the color of the leaves changes, isn't it? Why is that so? Why is that so? So in some seasons, the chlorophyll will fade away, or there will be less chlorophyll in the leaves. So there will be less absorption and proportionately more reflection of the red wavelengths, making the leaves appear red or yellow. Yellow is a combination of which two colors? Yellow is a combination of red and green wavelengths. Okay, so that is why in some seasons, when the chlorophyll absorption is less, more reflection in the red wavelength occurs. That is why the color changes or varies from green to yellow or red in some season. All right. So within a feature type itself, maybe suppose I am using this reflected energy. I am absorbing this reflected green wavelength. I am absorbing this to distinguish different types of leaves. Okay. Suppose for different types of leaves, if you look closer, there will be different shades of green itself, isn't it? Do you agree? All leaves are not the same green, isn't it? They are different, right? Different shades of green, isn't it? So if you look closer, if you use a remote sensor for recording energy reflected in the green range of the visible spectrum, you can see that for different plants or different leaves, the reflectance is different, isn't it? So within a feature type, within the leaves itself, or within the plants itself, the energy reflected, absorbed, and transmitted, it can vary for different wavelengths. So this feature, this various levels of absorption and reflectance, it can be used to differentiate different earth features. Is that clear? So these spectral variations, these various levels of reflectance, absorption or transmission, these spectral variations in the visible wavelengths result in the visual effect of color. All right. So most of the remote sensing systems, they operate in the wavelength region in which reflected energy predominate. Most of the, just like our eye, what does our eye look for? Is our eyes programmed for observing the absorbed energy or transmitted energy? What do we actually look for? We are actually looking for the reflected energy, isn't it? That energy, incident energy, falls on an object, and that energy is reflected and that falls on our eyes, isn't it? So we look for this reflected energy, just like I mentioned the case of the leaf. The red wavelength and the blue wavelength is absorbed by the leaf, and the green wavelength is reflected by the leaf. So that falls on our eyes and we sense that, right? Similarly, remote sensing sensors, other sensors also, they mainly operate in the wavelength region in which reflected energies predominate. All right, so that you can see in the last equation here, the energy, reflected energy, or the wavelength of the reflected energy, that will be equal to energy of the incident wave minus energy of the absorbed wave minus energy of the transmitted wave, because the total incident energy is the sum of reflected, absorbed and transmitted energies. So what we will look for generally will be the reflected energy. Remote sensing operations, what we generally look for is the reflected energy. All right. So absorption, it occurs when the radiation or energy is absorbed into the target, while transmission occurs when the radiation passes through a target, right? And reflection occurs when radiation bounces off the target and is redirected, right? So as I mentioned, in remote sensing, we are most interested in measuring the reflected radiation from the targets. So there are, we refer to two types of reflection, okay, to which represent two extreme ends of the way in which energy is reflected from a target. So one is a specular reflector and the another one is a diffuse reflector. Okay, so when a surface is smooth, we get specular or mirror-like reflection, where all or almost all of the energy is directed away from the surface in a single direction, as you can see in the first figure. That is a perfect or ideal specular reflector. That is, angle of incidence will be equal to angle of reflection, or the energy that falls on it, it reflects like a mirror. All the energy that is incident will be equal to the reflected energy. Nothing is going to be absorbed or transmitted. EI will be equal to ER. Okay, in the case of a specular reflector or ideal reflector, right? Then we have the last one, ideal diffuse reflector. So diffuse reflection occurs when the surface is rough and the energy is reflected almost uniformly in all directions, as you can see here. So that is a diffuse reflector. So most of the earth features, surface features, they lie somewhere between a perfectly specular or perfectly diffuse reflector. All right. So whether a particular target reflects specularly or diffusely or somewhere in between, that depends upon the surface roughness of the feature in comparison to the wavelength of the incoming radiation. All right, how rough the surface is when compared to the wavelength of the incoming radiation. That depends how a earth feature reflects, whether it is a specular reflector or a diffuse reflector or something in between. If the wavelengths are much smaller than the surface variations or the particle sizes that make up the surface, then diffuse reflection will dominate. I repeat, if the wavelengths are much smaller than the surface variations or particle sizes, then diffuse reflection can dominate. That is why fine grained sand, it will appear fairly smooth when you observe it or sense it using the long wavelength microwaves, but it would appear rough to the visible wavelengths. When we observe fine grained sand, we can see that it is a rough material, right? Sand, we observe that as a rough material when we observe it using our eyes. That is the visible, we are sensing it in the visible wavelength. But If you are sensing that using a long wavelength microwave, this fine grained sand, it will appear as very smooth material. All right. So these are the two types of reflectors. One is a specular reflector and another is a diffuse reflector. So all the earth features, they reflect in between an ideal specular reflector or an ideal diffuse reflector. So diffuse reflectance is more important in remote sensing of terrain features. All right. So what is this reflectance? I told you earlier, for a specular ideal specular reflector, all the incident energy will be equal to the reflected energy, right? So what is this reflectance? So reflectance, it is a characteristic of a feature measured as a function of wavelength called spectral reflectance, that is rho gamma, which is equal to the ratio between energy of the wavelength reflected from the object divided by energy of the wavelength incident upon the object into 100, represented as a percentage. That is called the spectral reflectance, right? Out of the incident energy, how much of the energy is reflected? That very simple definition, right? Spectral reflectance rho is equal to the ratio between the energy reflected out of the total incident energy. Clear? Is that clear? So this spectral reflectance will be different for different objects at different wavelengths. Reflectance is different for different materials. Do you agree that the reflectance of a leaf is different from a reflectance of sand? Do you agree that? Yes, the reflectance of the same sand at shorter visible wavelengths and longer microwave wavelengths is different. Do you agree? Yes, right? So this spectral reflectance is of very important concern to us in remote sensing. Why? Because this spectral reflectance is very different for different features on the Earth's surface. Not only it is different for different features, but also for the same features, it can be different at different wavelengths of sensing. Clear? So if you look at the spectral reflectance pattern of an object as a function of wavelength, you can distinguish almost every single feature on the Earth's surface, because the reflectance pattern for different wavelengths is different for each feature on the Earth's surface. Is that clear? So that graph of spectral reflectance of an object as a function of wavelength is called spectral reflectance curve or spectral reflectance pattern. So that provides an idea about the wavelength or region in which remote sensing is to be carried out for a particular feature. For example, here you can see spectral reflectance curve for different tree species, right? So if you look at the initial visible region, you can see, let us go to the longer wavelengths later. Suppose I am a scientist or a researcher interested in mapping different features or different types of vegetation or different types of plants in a particular region in the Nilgiris. Suppose, okay, later you are going for a master's in remote sensing or you are a researcher working in remote sensing area and you are assigned with a task to identify the different plant species in the Nilgiri region. Suppose. So can you basically use a photo, maybe a aerial photo? Can you simply use an aerial photo to identify different plant species? It might all look green, isn't it? It might all look green, right? Because why? Because here you can see at about 550 wavelength, 550 nanometer wavelength, you can see the reflectance is high, right? The reflectance is about 5%, right? That means the ratio between reflected energy and incident energy is about 5%. Can you see that? About the 550 wavelength. What comes in the 550 wavelength range? Visible spectrum. 400 to 700 is our visible spectrum, right? And in that visible spectrum, you can see the reflectance of the shorter wavelength 400 to 500, and the longer wavelength 600 to 700 in the visible spectra is the reflectance is very less. Can you see in the graph? Shorter wavelength and longer wavelength in the visible spectrum is reflectance is very less. Why? Why is that so? The longer and the shorter wavelengths, both they are absorbed by chlorophyll in the leaves, right? Yes or no? These different lines or these spectral reflectance curve or spectral reflectance pattern represent different lines that represent different species of plants. Okay, so you can see that for almost all these plant species, the shorter wavelength and longer wavelength in the visible spectrum, they are absorbed, and about 500 to 600 is having high reflectance, which is in the green color range, isn't it? So almost all these plants will appear green. So if you have a remote sensing sensor, a normal camera, okay, normal camera, if you take a photo that senses electromagnetic radiation in the 400 to 700 range, blue, green and red, isn't it? So that might not be enough to distinguish each of these plant species. If you look at the peak reflectance, you might be able to separate that blue line, right? Ocotea usambrensis, that particular plant species, you might be able to make it out because it is having a much higher reflectance than the other plant species. But other plant species you might not be able to make it out from this photograph, which operates in the 400 to 700 visible spectrum. So for that, what can you use? So what sensors should you use in this particular scenario? You should use sensors which operate in the higher wavelength. You can see here something above 750 to 800 nanometer wavelength. If you use, you can see that the reflectance for these different species of plants itself are largely different. Can you see that? Towards the longer wavelengths, the reflectance pattern at longer wavelengths for different species is largely different. So when you are assigned with such a task, you should look at the spectral reflectance curve or spectral reflectance pattern for that particular feature you are looking for, and you should choose your sensor or the remote sensing sensor that you use for that project. You should use it wisely based on the spectral reflectance pattern. So for any different feature on the Earth's surface, the reflectance pattern will be different. As I mentioned, for green leaf, for a leaf and for a sand, the spectral reflectance will be largely different, right? So maybe that you can differentiate in a visible spectra itself. But for the same type of sands or same types of, different types of sands or different types of leaves which have similar reflectance in the visible spectrum, if you want to identify different plant species or different types of soil on the Earth's surface, you should look at the spectral reflectance pattern of these different materials, and you should choose the particular wavelength in which the reflectance is largely varying. For example, as you see in this particular graph, for identifying different plant species, you are looking at a sensor which senses something above 750 nanometer wavelength. So you can see that the reflectance is largely varying for the same feature but different species. So we will stop here. All right. Thank you.